Hey everyone, ahlan wa sahlan fikum. Today we're finally going to continue our conversation about forms 2 to 10. I started by talking about form 4 last time since it's really similar to form 1, it's very straightforward conceptually, and it's actually pretty rare. So it was a low-risk way to introduce concepts that are shared between all the remaining forms. Today we're going to talk about forms 3 to 6 as we continue to work our way through the more complex forms. The pattern is very simple for both, and in fact I'm doing them together because they have basically the same pattern. Form 6 is as rare as Form 4, but Form 3 is average, neither rare nor very common. On the other hand, Form 3 has a light conceptual connotation, whereas Form 6 has a very strong conceptual connotation. So what does all that mean? Well, let's go find out. Let's start by taking a look at Form 3. One of the most common Form 3 verbs is safar, to travel. Remember, safar is considered the standard form of the verb, but it's actually the past tense for huwa. So huwa safar means he traveled. As you can see, what distinguishes Form 3 is that there's an alif after the first letter of the root. You may even notice that it looks like a Form 1 active participle, such as fatih. Well, yes, it does look the same. The key difference is that the active participle is fatih with a kasra eh sound, whereas Form 3 is safar with a fatha a sound. And of course it's safar with a fatha, because remember that all forms from Form 2 to 10 always have fatha vowels in the past tense, and safar is the past tense, he traveled. But anyway, I doubt you'll ever confuse the past tense of Form 3 for the Form 1 active participle, because obviously the active participle and the past tense have pretty different functions. What about the connotation of Form 3? As I said, it's not a very strong one, but a number of Form 3 verbs refer to actions that are directed toward another person. For example, wafa, to agree, samah, to forgive, jadal, to argue, and barak, to congratulate. But obviously that doesn't apply to all verbs, as in the case of safar. So it's more of an interesting thing to notice rather than something that will consistently help you predict the meaning of a verb. But then why do I mention it? Because that's where Form 6 comes in. A great example of a Form 6 verb is tabadal, meaning to exchange. Well, you'll immediately notice why I'm doing Form 3 and Form 6 together, because the Form 6 pattern is exactly like the Form 3 pattern, just with a single, subtle ta in front. Even though it's a rare type of verb, Form 6 is notable because it has a really strong connotation of an action that involves two or more people interacting in some way, as in ta'ayash, to coexist, from the root that gives us to live, taqatal, to fight, from the root that gives us to kill, and tasalah, to reconcile, from the root that gives us to fix. In fact, compare tabadal with baddal, which is the same root but in Form 2. They both mean to exchange, but baddal refers to someone exchanging something for something else. For example, I exchanged the shirt. But since tabadal is Form 6, you can be sure that it involves an interaction of some kind. So this one actually means, for example, people exchanging something with each other. For example, we exchange numbers. Speaking of interacting, to interact in the dialect is ta'amal, from the root that gives us to do. In fact, in standard Arabic, the Form 3 verb amal means to treat someone in a certain way. Although in the dialect we mostly use ta'amal for everything in the spectrum of to interact, to deal with someone, to relate to someone, and so on, it's interesting to put the original meanings of amal and ta'amal side by side, because we can see the subtle tendency of Form 3 to refer to actions directed at someone else, and a strong tendency of Form 6 to refer to actions that are mutual and directed at each other. Okay, now that we've discussed Form 3 and 6 in general terms, let's put them in their various forms. I'm going to breeze through some of this because it's really just a review of what we discussed before, so if you want more information about anything specific, check the videos linked up there. Anyway, as for the past tense, we're just going to attach the same endings we've always done. Again, the past tense vowels are always fatha in Forms 2 to 10, so there's really nothing special going on here. And as you can see, Forms 3 and 6 are pretty much exactly the same, except for that extra ta in front of the Form 6 verb. The present tense is basically the same idea, so let's add those prefixes, and there you have it. Well, there is one small catch, right? I've said lots of times that in Forms 2 to 10, you always have fatha in the past and kasra in the present. The truth is that for some reason Form 5 and 6, the two verbs that start with ta, they're the exception to that, since they have fatha also in the present. But they're the only exception, so it's definitely going to be kasra in the present tense for all the other forms, including Form 3. So if we actually add our vowels now, you'll notice that Form 3 switched from fatha to kasra, but Form 6 kept the fatha in the present tense too. So yeah, that's basically the only catch. But remember that when we make the imperative, it's supposed to have the same vowel as the present tense. So that little rule comes into play again. So the imperative of Form 6, salah, would just be salah. it's exactly the same. By the way though, because of the nature of Form 6 verbs referring to more than one person, usually the command would be in the plural, so صالحوا. And again, yes, it is exactly the same as the past tense صالحوا. Of course, this doesn't apply to Form 3, which does flip the vowels, so the imperative of سافر is سافر. Yeah, that presents its own little problem because after you flip the fatha into a kasra, now the imperative of Form 3 does look exactly the same as the Form 1 active participle. But that's how it is. At least I still think that the different uses of these words help us distinguish between them. Speaking of active participles, what do the Form 3 and 6 participles actually look like? Well, if you recall back to my video on Form 4, you'll know that all you do is add a meme to the standard form of the verb. And that's it. As I mentioned before, the only difference between the active and passive participles for forms 2 to 10 is actually just the vowel. The passive participle takes the past tense fatha, whereas the active participle takes the present tense kasra. But yeah, since form 6 doesn't switch to a kasra in the present tense, just as the imperative in the active participle, it doesn't switch either. So in this case, the active and passive participles are actually completely the same. So to summarize, Form 3 and 6 have the same pattern, only that Form 6 has a ta in front. Form 3 often refers to actions directed at someone else, whereas Form 6 almost always refers to actions directed at one another. They all take the same prefixes in the present tense and the same suffixes in the past tense. As always, the past tense vowel is always fatha, but whereas the Form 3 flips its vowel to a kasra in the present, Form 6 is a rare exception in that it stays the same, also affecting the imperative and the active participle. Otherwise, the participles are formed by adding a meme with a fatha for the passive and a kasra for the active. Lastly, the masdar. These are kind of weird to be honest, but at least they're consistent. For the masdar of Form 3, let's use the verb قابل, meaning to interview. Basically, you add a meme to the front and a ta marbuta to the back, and you get مقابلة, meaning an interview. Likewise, we have مناسبة and مباركة. مناسبة is an occasion, as in a special occasion or an event, and مباركة is when you go to someone's house to give your blessings on a مناسبة. As for Form 6, weirdly enough, the way you form the masdar is just by changing the vowel. So the masdar looks exactly the same as the past tense, but with a dhamma. So in the case of تعايش, for example, you get تعايش, meaning coexistence. And it can definitely be weird that the masdar, which is a noun, looks exactly like the verb if you don't write the vowel. So you'll have to rely on syntax and how the word is used to confirm the intended meaning. Well, that's basically all there is to say about Forms 3 and 6. You might just be wondering what happens when you have one of those special root types we've discussed before. Fortunately, there's not much to say. Obviously, type A is a normal root, so we've covered that. And root type C and D don't actually affect things at all. Type D roots, for example, have a consonant vowel, so either waw or ya in the middle of the root, but it just behaves as a regular consonant, as in jawab or qawab, or even da'ayash. The only root type that actually affects anything is type B, which is when there's a consonant vowel at the end, which turns into an alif maksura, as in nada or la'a. Still, this is nothing new. They behave exactly as you would expect of a Form 1 verb like masha or haka. I mean, really the only difference is that in Form 3, you have the extra alif that is already part of the form. So nada, masha, nadait, mashet, binadi, bimshi. So other than what makes the forms themselves different, a type B root doesn't ever change anything, and they behave exactly the same across all verb forms, including Form 1 and also Forms 2 to 10. It's all the same. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. For the sake of time, I didn't want to spend too long reviewing what we've covered before, so if you want to review anything specifically, check out those other videos that I've linked up there. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.
اهلا حبايبي وشكرا للجماعه اللي بيحضروا القناه. اذا بدكم تكملوا تشوفوا هالفيديوز اعملوا سبسكرايب، واذا شفتوني مؤخرا تفضلوا روحوا شوفوا الفيديوز الماضيه بالبلاي ليست، وتذكروا اني عملت مصادر لتعلم اللهجه الفلسطينيه تقدروا تلاقوها بالموقع تبعي اللي مكتوب تحت بالديسكربشن، ونشوفكم المره الجايه.